Debbie, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bina. I'm thrilled to be here.
I mean, there is so much we can cover with Google, but today I think we're going to focus on AI technology. We both sat on a forum together earlier this year, and there is so much to explore there. But before I launch into Google and AI, I'd like to understand from you, what does sustainable growth mean to you?
Sustainable growth for me has many dimensions to it. I think it's about long-term nature. I think it's about the longevity with which it supports the business, but also the societal benefits and sort of the wider stakeholder group that's associated. And I think, given we're going to talk about AI, I think AI is a great example of that. So for me, the growth opportunities of AI are tremendous. We published some research last year that indicated about a 400 billion pound economic opportunity for the UK by 2030, which is tremendous kind of opportunity for the country. I think then you translate it down to businesses and each individual business and the opportunity for them to drive either growth or drive expenses out of their business. And then you think about the individual and the opportunity for personal productivity and just sort of growth in our own lives is tremendous. So that sort of the growth sides of it. I would say the sustainability aspect is sort of what's going to be required to make sure it's benefiting all of us for the long term. And I think that's really where this idea of it being for everyone and benefiting everyone really comes in. I think it's one of the things I worry a lot about is the extent to which the opportunity and the growth of AI actually can benefit all of us across the country, across all the regions of the country, across all the different walks of life, people's backgrounds. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make sure everyone can benefit from this opportunity.
And, you know, when we talk about that, so you talk about very passionately about how benefiting everybody's society as much as business. How do you think it is possible to meet the needs of people, planet, and profit?
I do. I think it's not inevitable, and so I think it's going to take hard work. But I do think this kind of opportunity, as we kind of frame it around the economy, for businesses, for people, is really profound. And I would say the aspect we have to get right is around the sustainability dimension and the planet dimension, as you call it. And I think that's where we think across a couple of different dimensions. We think, what can we do with Google? What can we do with partners? And then what can we help consumers do in their daily lives to actually benefit the planet and the way they kind of operate day to day? And for us at Google, we have a commitment to be carbon free in all of our data centers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is a really tremendous commitment that we made back in 2020. To be honest, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there because that requires us figuring out how do you make solar panels work when there's no sunshine or make the wind turbines work when there's no wind. But we are committed on that journey. And I think when it comes to partners, one of the things we've enabled is actually some pretty cool satellite image technology that enables kind of Google Earth to take all of our planetary satellite data and actually leverage it for different partners in the way they might use it in Google Cloud. And so before I worked at Google, I actually worked at Unilever, and Unilever is one of our partners in this. And so what they're doing is actually using some of this data to look at the sustainability of their supply chain. And so looking at sort of risks around deforestation, around sort of areas of societal impact around how their suppliers work, which has been really interesting. And then the last piece I would call out is sort of what we do and enable for everyday people. One of my favorite examples is actually the way if you use Google Maps, hopefully you use Google Maps, and you follow the little blue dot around to get the fastest way. One of the things we've enabled is not only the fastest route, but also the most eco-friendly route. And what that's based on is like historic traffic patterns of the likelihood that if you are in a car and you are traveling, that you will stay at a constant speed, which is one of the ways you can reduce the carbon emission of your car, for example. Also, it provides public transport options and sort of other recommended options for being more eco-friendly in terms of your travel. So I would say all of those things together, thinking about what Google can do, what we can do with partners, what we can enable people to do, are going to be the ways that we enable the growth opportunity of AI to come forward in a way that isn't harmful to the planet.
So you talked about the economic impact report that you released last year.
Yeah.
So 400 billion is an enormous, potential
It is.
there. How's Google kind of getting ready to really lean into that? What are you doing differently that helps you lean into that?
Yeah. So the 400 billion pounds of economic opportunity, for me, why it is so important, and thinking about the work you and I, how we encountered each other working in particular with government and having conversations about how do we bring the opportunity of AI forward. That 400 billion pounds is equivalent to 2.6% annualized GDP growth. And I'd say the number one thing that I hear across businesses and government and frankly people in the UK is how do we get growth back in this country? And the biggest driver of that 400 billion pounds is productivity improvement. And so when we think about how do we drive that productivity improvement, it is across all of those different aspects I was just describing. So what can we do with government? How do we actually enable public services to improve? One of the stats that's really extraordinary to me is the 700,000 hours of administrative tasks per year we estimate can be saved by AI for just teachers and GPs. And if you think about, the time that they spent writing up reports or reports either in the classroom or in a doctor's surgery, and how you could actually apply that better time in the classroom, I think it's pretty tremendous what we could see around public services. I would say for businesses, the opportunity both to drive kind of expenses out of the business, but also find new avenues for growth by leveraging AI is really tremendous. And then lastly, I'd point to people and our own productivity. We estimate about 100 hours per year of an average worker being saved by applying kind of AI tools and technology. And that, to unlock that, is probably the piece that I spend a lot of time with the team thinking about how do we make sure the tools are available for everyone in the country. So we do a lot of work around skills, kind of up and down the country across many different kind of areas of where it is that people could actually benefit from these tools in their lives. And it's sometimes in surprising places. It could be, I would give you the example of teachers, but how they could do lesson planning leveraging AI. Or one of the examples that we were just talking about recently was actually builders on a building site. It's not just the physical construction where people think, oh, how could you possibly apply AI in that context? Actually, there's a ton of organizational work that goes on, project management, how do they manage timescales, things like that, that actually you can apply it kind of to everyone's life. So I think across all those dimensions are really where we're focused.
What you've just brought to life there is how AI can impact an individual. So we call it sort of augmentation of the individual.
Yes.
And most people tend to think about AI as just augmenting the enterprise. How do we make
Right.
the enterprise more productive? But you have to start with the individual.
Absolutely.
Before you can get to the enterprise. We met when we were working with government to talk about how can we promote and accelerate the adoption, because the adoption rate of AI in organizations is pretty low. Businesses do acknowledge the opportunity for AI, and even one of our most recent CEO reports highlighted that 63% of the CEOs quoted ethical challenges as the reason why they didn't feel comfortable adopting it. So what are the most significant risks, and how do businesses prioritize safety?
Yeah, when I talk to business leaders, I do hear sometimes, concerns about misuse or about mistakes that might be generated. And I think those are all valid concerns. And, we have techniques that we recommend people use around secure cloud, for example, or around kind of grounding things in their own localized data that are very practical and easy to implement for businesses. But I think the biggest kind of risk potentially for businesses is the opportunity of missing this moment. And I think that one of the things I've observed over the last year is there's really been an evolution from last year, and I'd be curious if you've seen this with the businesses you engage with, but sort of this notion of, wow, isn't AI amazing? And then sort of this almost fear of it's overwhelming what it can do for me. Into this year, it's very much about how practical applications, show me the use cases, what is most relevant for my business. And so we are in deep conversations with pretty much every business, certainly every large business, and trying to make sure this is also benefiting small businesses, which is a lot of the work we did together with the government, thinking about how do you identify the use cases that matter to your business? And to me, that's really ultimately down to leadership and the responsibility of a leader to understand what are the fundamental drivers of your business. One of the things we say about AI is it's a horizontal technology or general purpose technology. The idea is it can be applied in lots of different ways to lots of different things, which is why it can seem overwhelming. I think less so this year, but certainly last year, this was a big conversation. And I still think we hear a bit of this about people being nervous to give access to the tools to their employees at large because they're a little bit nervous about what data is going to go in, et cetera. I actually think the best approach is ideally giving the tools to the team so that they can actually be in action around those test, learn, and scale. The reality is there's a bunch of data, and I'm sure KPMG has some of its own, that shows that businesses that think that they've told their employees do not use, these tools are actually just using them in their private accounts, which is definitely not the way you want it to do. So I think the recommendation is to ground things in the data that's relevant for your business, and provide the kind of access point to the tools and then the skills program around that.
I agree. So at KPMG, what we've done is we've developed a toolkit, KPMG Ava, right? And the purpose of that is to bring all these tools so that employees can access them in a safe environment. Again, we want to empower colleagues to use AI rather than relinquish power to AI. You showcased that to me and others quite eloquently when I came to visit your offices. How you're using AI now to really open the horizon for businesses, to give them data they wouldn't have necessarily had access to be able to grow as well, which is a very big agenda for us right now. So the growth agenda. We talk about responsible AI. I know, you were one of the first organizations to come out with your AI principles. We've invested a lot in our trusted AI framework to really bring trust in how we work. The King, in his statement this year, talked about the evolution of regulation and the intent for the UK. There are different practices. I'd just really love to get your perspective on how business and government can work together in whichever form this might take.
I mean, we see, as I said, a huge opportunity working with the government around public services in particular, because I think that's a really big opportunity for us to unlock more productivity from those services and get people to deliver the services that I think everyone in this country expects. I would say specifically on the question of regulation, we have long said that we support regulation. We think that AI is too important not to regulate. And it's important to get the regulation right. I'd say the country has a lot of regulation in a lot of different sectors. And so I think one of the things that we encourage government to think about is, how do you think about regulating AI in the context of existing regulation and modulating it for the risk that's presented in different contexts? So, AI being used by a comedy writing team, the risk is very different from it being used in health services context. And so obviously in health services, you want to make sure you're getting accurate, a read of a mammography or some kind of, test that's being done as an augmentation potentially to the work that a doctor is doing or a technician is doing. In the comedy writing sense, I mean, is it really important? And actually, is it important that it actually can be more creative and help people kind of expand the repertoire of what they think is possible? So one of the elements that actually we like about sort of the current approach the UK has been taking is recognizing the sort of context-specific nature of regulation. And I mean, I think we'll obviously see how things pan out across the autumn and into the spring about how that transpires with the new government.
You've been using AI in most of your products. You talked about Google Maps earlier. KPMG have been using forms of AI, whether it's rules-based or machine learning, and it's now the generative AI that's really sort of changing the way the landscape's moving. And I think both organizations are working with clients as well. It's not just about our own. I'd love to get your perspective of how the experiences of using AI within your products and services is now influencing and shaping how you're working with customers and your alliance partners. How are you using that in your interactions with helping organizations unlock their potential?
Yeah. So one of the things I think is funny is when, I'm sure you've encountered this as well in your interactions with businesses, is when a business says, I need an AI strategy. It's like, no, you don't need an AI strategy. You have a strategy for your business. How can AI be an enabler of that strategy? And I think that is very much how we have been approaching AI at Google for a long time. I mean, we became an AI first company back in 2016. We've been working with AI for decades. In 2012, there are stories of the teams actually working on YouTube videos and trying to identify cats in videos and being very excited when we were able to identify, like, we actually found an algorithm that could find a cat in a video. But that's like the early stage of how AI developed. And then you think about products like Google Translate, which is probably my favorite product. And what that enabled is to have a model learn languages the way a child learns languages. And so it learns about the connections between words across different countries. We have a 1,000 language project where we're trying to actually basically map all of the different languages known and spoken today to each other. It's pretty extraordinary, and it really allows people to connect across, across geographies and across languages in a way that is pretty profound, and I think shows that AI actually can bring humanity forward in a way that I think people worry a lot about what AI is going to do to kind of block the connection between people. I actually think in many ways it's going to enable a whole new way that people can connect in a more profound way. Actually, the 3 most popular words on Google Translate are hello, how are you, and I love you,
Oh.
which just shows like that's what people want to talk about, which is pretty amazing. In terms of kind of what that means for businesses, one of the examples I think about is you think about Google search. Like Google search is the foundation of Google in many ways. And, it's about organizing the world's information, making it universally accessible and useful, which is kind of the mission at its heart and its founding. And some people think, wow, Google search actually hasn't changed that much over the last 25 years. But in fact, it's changed tremendously. And I'm sure you can remember the first time you did a query and the 10 blue links. And you think now, the fact that it is images and it's videos and you can hum and find something, and you can take your 12 billion times a month, amazing, people take out their phone, lens an image, take an image of this plant and say, how should I be watering this plant? You don't have to know the name of the plant. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary.
It's a question that's $1 million question.
Ooh.
That we were trying to address in that forum that we were involved in, is where businesses are reasonably early or just about to start their journey with AI. What advice would you give them?
One of the conversations we're in a lot with businesses around how is AI potentially going to be a competitor to me? And actually, one of the reframes we encourage people to have is that AI is not competing with you. It's actually your competitor using AI better than you are is the thing you'd really need to worry about. And that's where we have people focus on how can AI be an enabler of your strategy. The idea of how businesses can get started, I think, is about that leader identifying the most important kind of profit and business drivers for their company. And what are the expense lines? What are the revenue growth opportunities? How can I take this sort of general purpose technology and have it be an amplifier of whatever my business strategy is? So it's really connecting AI to be an accelerant of your business strategy. So that's where I would start. The second thing I would do is really think about a model that's around setting up some test and learn experiments with some really clear KPIs about how are you going to know when you are successful. One of the places I sometimes see businesses fall down is they have a lot of tests running, but it's not exactly clear how you're going to assess which of the tests that work and which of them don't. So I think having some clear KPIs that measure and then having the leader kind of get visibility into how those are going. And then ultimately, another place I see potentially businesses falling down is when you identify the winning use cases, how are you scaling them? And I think scaling them where the kind of skills and tools being available for everyone in your enterprise really comes in.
How fascinating. No, I suspect most of the listeners probably didn't realize how much is happening behind the scenes to keep it ahead of the game, keep us ahead of the game as we're using search as an example. Google opened an accessibility discovery center recently, and I'd love to understand how you see technology getting into the hands of those that don't always have access to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Accessibility Discovery Center, I think, is an amazing example of our commitment to making sure the technology is accessible to everyone. And we opened the first one outside the United States in London in 2022, and it's based in our King's Cross office. And what it enables us to do is have product managers as well as partners collaborate with the impacted communities to understand how are our products able to be used or not used by people that have particular circumstances that mean that they don't have sort of traditional ways that they interact with maybe a keyboard or a mobile phone or whatever. One of the examples that I think is really powerful is a project called Project Relate. There's about 250 million people we estimate in the world that actually have a different way of speech patterns, where it's very hard for them to be understood with traditional speaking kind of engagements. What we have done is actually enabled an Android app to be training a model essentially on the way they speak. And this is essentially an AI model that understands how they say words and how they communicate, then transition it into a computerized voice so they can basically connect with people and be understood. And it's the kind of project that really makes my spine tingle, because the idea that 250 million people who are basically not able to communicate in the world suddenly have the ability to connect with everyone around the world is extraordinary. And you think about the population in this country, for example, who are not able to be in work because they are unable to leave their homes or they're not able to communicate in some way. And the idea that we could actually get technology in the hands of everyone so that they could benefit the economy, but they could also benefit their own lives is really tremendous. And so that's really the work that the Accessibility Discovery Center is committed to.
You work with policymakers around innovation. I'd like to get your perspectives on the UK and how the UK stays at the forefront of innovation.
Yeah, I am incredibly honored to be leading our business here in the UK. I actually have a long history and connection to the UK. I lived here as a teenager in the 1980s and can remember walking down King's Road and seeing all the culture that was vibing at that time. And I'm just thrilled to be back. This is my third time back in the UK and love this country. Part of my job at Google is to kind of advocate for the UK in a global context. And I'd say that many of those aspects of the UK are well known and appreciated by folks in Mountain View. I would say the opportunity for us is tremendous. So we have made pretty substantial investments. We have committed to a $1 billion data center being built in Waltham Cross. We have invested $1 billion in our Central St. Giles office building. We have an enormous new facility opening in King's Cross that'll bring us to about the capacity to have about 10,000 employees in the UK. We have tremendous employees here. One of the things I love about leading our business here is we're really like a mini Google. We have about 50% of our people are in tech and engineering roles. We have about 25% in sales and marketing and about 25% in sort of general and administrative roles, which is kind of representative of Google as a whole. So kind of our presence here is pretty profound. And one of the teams that is, I would say, our kind of gem in the crown, if you will, is our Google DeepMind team. And they are the leading work across kind of the whole company around the leading edge of AI. They are really the leading, I would say, AI research organization kind of at any enterprise. There are obviously a number of different companies operating in the space, but we're really proud of the leading work that Google DeepMind is doing. And the fact that Demis and his team are based here in the UK is just another reason that we're really excited about kind of the potential of this country.
You talked about data center that you're building in Waltham Cross, and actually you did talk about your aspirations around net zero.
Yeah.
And you were very open and said, well, we're still working on how to get there. But, given there's a lot of conversation around the impact on the environment of delivering the potential of AI and the sheer capacity that that's going to require, the engine effectively, which is data centers plus a whole bunch of things. How do you envisage that you'll kind of face into that? Because there's an exponential growth coming here, as well as you've obviously set very clear targets as well. How are you facing that?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, our commitment to net zero is real and profound, and it is going to be hard, as you note. And so I think the path to net zero by 2030 is not totally clear to us, but we are very committed to it. We have, enormous number of team members that are working on it. I actually think AI is going to be amazingly part of the solution here. And so we have used AI as an example to actually help us model when to access the grid for non-urgent versus urgent kind of tasks that are being demanded from our data centers. So that's just one way that we think about like managing access to the grid. I think that we are actively engaging also with government around how do we make sure that clean energy is easily accessible at the right price and not only is captured, but also is accessible in the grid for all of us to be able to use. So this is, I would say, a big topic, not just for Google to get after, but I would say, the entire ecosystem that needs to figure out kind of our path forward to access and create enough capacity for clean energy.
I think that's very true, very true. Am I right in understanding it's 26 years since Google was created?
Just about. I think it's, just about our 26th birthday.
So much has happened in almost
true.
3 decades. I mean, I remember first using it. I mean, literally, it's such a long time ago. I guess you've stayed at the forefront of innovation, and part of that will be, as an organization, you foster innovation and there's a culture of innovation. I know that one of your sort of big sayings is 10 times thinking.
10x.
Is that 10x,
yes, 10x
thinking? 10x thinking. Could you elaborate on that and how that sort of has fueled that, culture of innovation?
Yes, absolutely. So 10x thinking refers to this idea of not being incremental in the way that we think about improvement. And so the idea is, what are the 10x ideas that actually will not just incrementally improve this, but take it to a whole new level? And that's sort of the orientation around it. And so it's things like driverless cars. It's things like Project Loon. It's, these ideas that seem almost science fiction-like when someone first tells you about it, but they're basically pointing to transformative technological advancements we can make around big societal problems using computer science. And that is sort of the foundation of 10x thinking. And if you think about Google now sits within the company Alphabet. Alphabet now has Google as a division with a lot of amazing services, 15 different services that each reach more than 500 million people each. It's pretty extraordinary. And each of those is an example of 10x thinking when it started, right?
Yeah.
Google Maps or Photos, or they were all looking at a business problem or a human problem and saying, how can we actually do something transformational that seemed crazy at the time? So we have all of those businesses now operating within Google, and then we have something called Other Bets, which is where things like Waymo and other businesses are sitting, that are kind of still, I would say, emerging opportunities that we are putting a lot of capex and investment into. But it's that range of transformational ideas that we're bringing forward into the world.
And talking about transformational ideas, that requires transformational skills. And you alluded to the evolution of skills and the need to bring the right skills fit for the future. How are you thinking about skills for the future?
I mean, skills to me is one of the most important things that we need to all be working on. And I think we have long had a skills agenda in the UK. And one of the reasons we started about 10 years ago a skills program is that we saw a digital divide potentially emerging. Businesses that adopted technology were growing twice as fast as businesses that didn't adopt technology. And we thought that wasn't right. And we wanted to make sure everyone had equal access to the tools of business in the digital world. And so we started this program called the Google Digital Garage. And that is because the references to the fact that Google started in a garage back in Silicon Valley, that sort of iconic story. And we went around the country, and we've now trained over 1 million Brits in digital skills, either for their careers or their businesses or their own lives. And so that happened, that million Brit kind of statistic was shared last summer. Last summer, we also launched our most popular skills program ever called the New Fundamentals of AI. And that was a kind of AI training program that was available free to anyone online. Anyone can access it that's listening to this podcast. And it basically gave you the tools and tips to actually get active with AI in your own life. Kind of taking that forward, kind of another kind of notch was the work we just launched actually sort of a couple of weeks ago, which is around AI Works. One of the things that I think has been hotly contested and theorized about is what is the impact that AI is going to have on jobs. The reality is we don't know. There's a lot of different models going on out there, but we feel like we should actually be in the field, actually looking at how we get AI skills into the hands of people. Our best estimates, we did a research study with the team at Public First, suggest that about 2/3 of jobs are going to be augmented by AI in some way. And making sure that that augmentation happens is not going to happen if we just sit here and wait for it to happen. So people have to get engaged with these skills. And so AI Works was really this idea of, let's get some pilots going. How do we actually have training programs that address some of the fears that people might have? So I think there's really, I would say, a requirement that we get out there and think about how to get these tools to be augmenting people's working experiences. So not only are we bringing the productivity benefits to the UK, but frankly making people's lives a little bit more delightful when they are doing their working tasks that might be a little more on the administrative side.
When you sort of look back in your early career, is there anything in particular that you can pinpoint that sort of really helped you in your career? Or if you went back to your sort of younger self, is there anything that you would have loved to have known then?
Yeah. You know, I one of the things that I figured out, it took a while to realize this, is that everyone has their own strengths. I'm a big believer in sort of the strengths finder approach to understanding yourself and then building from that. I actually have a niece and nephew who are thinking about their steps going into the working world for the first time. And, you know, we talk a lot about what are the right kind of first jobs to take. And I talk to them a lot, and I talk to people who are earlier in their career about this idea of trying to identify your superpowers. For a long time, I thought that the things I was good at, everyone was good at. And I just assumed like everyone saw the world the way I saw the world. And then over time you realize, oh, actually, that's a thing that I am uniquely good at. I'm not particularly good at that thing, but I'm really good at this thing. Communicating, focus, that's kind of some of my superpowers. Helping to focus an organization, synthesize complexity. And so leaning into that and saying, what are the roles where I can contribute that to organizations has really been an unlock for me in terms of the ability for me to have an impact in the world. And I'd say the other thing is I really believe strongly in the importance of diversity, and in part because I really believe in that adage, if you can see it, you can be it. And I remember I've been at Google about 10 years now. When I first started at Google, Ruth Porat, who is our former CFO, now our Chief Investment Officer, had started at about the same time I did. And I saw her do a fireside chat with someone. And it was the first time in my life that I remember sitting in an audience and seeing someone and thinking, she really inspires me. I want to model myself after her. I love the way she was so clear. She was so competent, confident, but also human. I just loved everything about how she presented herself to the world. And I don't aspire to be a CFO, and that's not my skill set, but it was the first time I really saw someone that I said, gosh, I could model myself off of her. And so I find I feel like I take a lot of responsibility in not only trying to be a role model that hopefully some people see that in themselves, but also to hire people around me and identify other people that can be role models for others so that everyone feels that they can contribute their full capacity to what they can contribute to the organization I'm leading.
Wonderful, wonderful. Find your uniqueness.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about sustainable growth and the incredibly important role that AI is playing in that and will continue to play in that. So as a business, as a society, we've talked a lot about that. How do you sustain yourself?
Yes, because it does. Part of leadership is really making sure that you are making sure you're taking care of yourself so you can show up every day to help contribute to your organization and bring the opportunity forward for the world. You know, I do a lot of the things I think you hear in a lot of the different business books. I believe in the power of sleep, which is part of the rest and rejuvenation. And it's not always that every night I get the perfect amount of sleep, but I would say on aggregate across a week, I'm trying to get a decent amount of sleep. I believe in the power of exercise and eating well and, surrounding yourself with friends and family that keep it real for you. I mean, the advantage of having teenage children is, they definitely keep it real for you. And that is very grounding and helpful.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. I'm just going to round up. There is a lot in there, but I'm just going to say for the businesses out there, what I'm hearing loud and clear from you, Debbie, is don't miss this moment. AI is the most profound platform that's going to change the way we work, the way we live, the way we interact with each other. AI enables you to deliver your strategy. So think of it as a tool, not as a replacement. You talked about actually using your purpose and business purpose as the underlying driver of how you adopt AI, but using the general power of this thing to make it real for you. A bit like we've talked about in special use cases, test and learn. Test and learn, test and learn. And that brings me to something actually that we didn't talk about, but resilience. And our approach to failure has to change because with AI, we're going to test things, we're going to play with things, may not work, and it's okay. You talked about AI being part of the solution for accessibility, and I think that is very right? It's not just within the UK, it's across globally as well. How do we make sure everybody has access and can benefit from it? And find your superpower. Find your superpower. I wish I found my superpower a lot earlier as well, actually. You've got so much energy. Whenever we interact, you've bring so much of what Google stands for. And it's so lovely to see that translate into our organization and the things that we do with you. So I know that many businesses benefit from that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Bina. I really appreciate it.